A little bit about John. We've got a very interesting bio today on this individual. We have a speaker and trainer since '86. He's a radio talk show host and private investigator, homicide detective since '73, homicide detective state of Missouri for 8 years. He's also a decorated Vietnam veteran. He's also flew 57 combat missions. He's been on bodyguard assignments for Ambassador Alan Keyes and Jane Fonda. He's the author of numerous articles on personal security, and he's the author of Feel Safe Anywhere, You Can Be Your Own Bodyguard. But today we are going to be talking about Planet X, and John has an unusual route into this because it's been a journey of discovery for John, and in a personal sense with contacts and actual physical events as well, and it's been an enlightening process for John. So without further ado, let's bring on today's super interesting guest. Hi John, very welcome to the show.
Thank you, James. Good to be here.
Wow, John, you have a decorated, colourful work history, John. Let's tell us a little bit about that. Tell us a bit about that part of your life, John. Is that something you enjoy doing? Is that something you?
Well, when I was, I guess it was I was 20 years old when I got to Vietnam. I was only been out of high school 15 months. I got there just 4 weeks after my 20th birthday. Very young man, to say the least. But at some point during that combat experience, I decided that I was going to do things in my life that were fun and interesting and were important, as opposed to just having a job. So my career has taken various twists and turns based on that foundational belief, and no regrets. It's been a good ride, and I'm still at it. Been a radio talk show host part-time beginning in 1994, and the last 3 years or so, more and more full-time. Not quite full-time, but close to it.
I've tuned into some of the shows, John. Great stuff that you're providing here. Of course, people can check you out on the background bio at thelibertyman.com. Of course, you've got your own YouTube channel there. You can listen to your shows as well. John, this is unusual for somebody with this prolific work ethic and work history to be in this field. Usually we have a lot of people researching Planet X from different aspects. I guess I just wanted to touch on the homicide detective part of your life. You must have seen some really unusual, interesting, bizarre scenarios during that work time as well.
Well, of course. I investigated my first murder when I was 25 years old. I still got one in my case inventory. I need to wrap up and do a final report for the local prosecuting attorney. But beginning as an intelligence analyst, and then later in my college degree as a paralegal, both my areas of formal education trained me to be a professional researcher as an intelligence analyst and paralegal. And it stood me in good stead all these years, James, because it trained my mind to work in a very focused and disciplined manner to do whatever I want to do. It was 15 years ago this spring that two friends of mine, independent researchers, presented to me the initial information that I heard about Planet X, and I thought it was pretty strange and pretty bizarre. But I took that information and went to a friend of mine who works for, as we politely say, the lettered agencies as an outside vendor. And he thought it was pretty wild also, but he knew me well enough, and we're now friends for 30 years. And at the time, we'd been friends for 15 years. And he went to some people that he thought might know about this, and it turned out they did. He got back with me about 3 or 4 weeks later. He says, John, this Planet X thing is exactly what you said it is. The government's known about it since 1979. They've been getting ready for it since 1979. Yes, it is real.
Wow, John, you know, this is the thing I love about today's show is you're a no-nonsense guy, you're a very rational guy. That analytical skill set, like I worked as a systems analyst in the engineering industry, and I know what it's like to have an analytical skill set. It doesn't really matter what the problem is or what the research topic is. It's a set of skills that you can hone in on to get to truth answers, and it seems,
Precisely.
It seems, John, you seem to be doing that. I mean, there's so many things I could focus on today. I guess, tell me about the first line of evidence that you got presented to you, first of all, John.
Well, both these men, and one didn't know the other was approaching me, by the way, they both told me about the effects of the 10th planet when it comes to our solar system, which are the oceans coming out of the basins, 200-mile-an-hour winds for maybe a day or two, possibly a coronal mass ejection as part of it. That may or may not happen, what some people call a kill shot, and earthquakes, violent 8.5 and 9-point earthquakes all over the planet. So, and of course volcanoes popping off. Pretty wild stuff, but there's evidence, James, that this has happened numerous times in the past. And before the evolutionary theory of Charles Darwin became so ingratiated in scientific theory, in the beginning of the 1840s. Most scientists believed in a catastrophic scenario of how this planet goes through very rapid, very violent changes. Because that's, quite frankly, that's where the evidence points to, not slow, gradual change, but rapid, violent change. And an author, a doctor named Immanuel Velikovsky, he wrote 3 or 4 books back in the 1950s and 60s.
Sure.
And he personally went to parts of the planet where he can still find the evidence of violent, rapid change in the form of bones of various animals all jumbled together in caves where they all met their death from being smashed there by water, and other sources of evidence. So that was my beginning point 15 years ago. Once I verified that it was real, I started my own research, and things were going along quite well, James, until the summer of, it would have been the summer of 2005, I guess it was, when I was having lunch with a friend of mine I served with in the Army. He's a dual service veteran, U.S. Army Special Forces and U.S. Navy SEAL. And he told me about a classified briefing he'd been to in 1985.
Wow.
And at that classified briefing, they were all told, gentlemen, during your lifetimes, these oceans are going to come out of their basins, flooding all coastal areas worldwide, up to about 400 feet above what we now call sea level. And when it comes time to retire, gentlemen, you just might want to retire to the Arkansas, Missouri Ozarks as one of the known safe havens. Now, since that briefing, since I talked to my friend about that briefing, James, I also do something else you didn't mention in my bio. I teach concealed carry training, where men and women in Missouri can get their permit to carry pistols concealed.
Wow.
And in the process of that, I've met about 24 more of these Navy veterans, all of whom were at the same briefing, all of whom retired in the Arkansas, Missouri Ozarks because of the briefings that they received. And I've been able to backtrack the very first of those briefings back to 1979 also, when one of my listeners up in Montana helped set up the chairs, the tables, the light system, the sound for a briefing of admirals on a Saturday morning down in New Orleans. So it's been quite a experience to locate these veterans who were at these briefings, to debrief them myself. And of course, along the way, I recreated the map that the veterans were shown at these briefings, a map showing North America with new coastlines and an inland sea where the Mississippi River is now, inland sea, 100, 200 miles wide, 100, 200 feet deep, splitting the country in two, north-south.
Wow, you know, I just came back from Malta, John. I love megaliths, ancient cultures, and but while I was there, I went to Hardalum Cave, which is got these Ice Age animals compacted in such a high concentrate, and it's so high up, it could only have been a flood that done this. Now, I was aware of this. I don't know if that's one of the places Velikovsky went to, but I wasn't aware actually that Velikovsky had done that. Velikovsky was quite a genius, and he's quite the analyst himself, John.
Well, he was a medical doctor, and his profession gave him enough financial wherewithal to travel to these remote parts of the world and make these personal observations. When you start finding tiger bones mixed up with elephant bones, mixed up with horses, mixed up with goats, all in the same cave, all jumbled together, you know something very, very disastrous happened there. Of course it did, when the bones are mixed together in that manner. Something else Velikovsky did that no archaeologist ever taken the time to do, and that was to reconcile ancient calendars from various ancient cultures, just like you reconcile your checkbook. You can't compare events, natural events, that have happened in the deep past, James, unless you could compare calendars. And no archaeologist had ever taken the time to do that. Well, Velikovsky did.
Wow.
And once he reconciled the ancient calendars, then he was able to line up and make sense of the catastrophes that had happened 3, 4, and 5,000 years ago, where nobody else had been able to do that. And he found out that these catastrophes all lined up together. The people who lived in South America 2, 3, 4,000 years ago, the people that lived in Scandinavia 3,000 years ago, in Egypt and in China, all had calendars and all left written records. And once he made that determination, he was able to determine, for example, the Great Flood. Every culture that had a calendar and left written records all recorded the Great Flood happening at the same time.
Oh, incredible. Didn't the Chinese write about, I think Velikovsky thought that the sun didn't rise for 3 days or something like that?
Well, it wasn't 3 days. It was part of a day.
Part of a day.
In the book of Isaiah in the Bible, the Hebrew army needed a few more hours to win this battle that they're fighting. And Velikovsky, his reasoning was, well, if the Israeli Hebrew army got the extra 3 or 4 hours they needed to win this battle, therefore, The sun must not have come up in China when it was supposed to the following day. And guess what? It didn't. You know, that would be pretty important. If you know, if you're a scientist or the emperor in China, the sun doesn't come up for 3 or 4 hours when it's supposed to. You think you might tell the scribes to make a notation of that? Of course you would.
Sure, sure. That's major
But
news. That's
that's an example of ancient Chinese historical documents verifying the book of Isaiah.
And we know that the Chinese kept really, really detailed records. They were obsessed with record keeping.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Absolutely.
Well, you know, and to see the corroborating evidence, I know that's where the analytical skills comes in, John. You know, you're able to read that for what it is. Let's talk about the infrastructure and the communications. I mean, Nibiru coming in, John, wreaking havoc on our planet. And we'll come back to maybe some details of Nibiru, but this is going to be unprecedented to anything that we know in our history. This is going to not just upset the apple cart, John. This is going to just take everything down. It's going to take down probably most of the internet. We're talking electrical communications, telecommunications, road networks. I mean, sea levels, shipping ports. Everything's coastal, John. This is going to be everything's going to come to a standstill.
Well, coming to a standstill does not begin to describe the consequences. If you look around the planet, James, 75–80% of the world's population lives within 100 miles of a major body of water and ocean. The infrastructure that provides housing, fresh water, food, everything these jobs, everything these people need, medical support, is in them same areas, of course. So even if the people can escape, and many of them will, the infrastructure that keeps these people alive will all be damaged and destroyed.
Well, you know, I'm not too far from the coast here. I can see it at my back window. But we do have mountains in the region. Is it a case then, you know, people have been aware of this knowledge in America, John, and been fleeing to the high ground? Is this been proven? Have we got documented cases of this? Has people spoken out about this?
Well, I'm a person and I've spoken out about it.
Sure.
No, seriously. You don't have to dig too far, and there are simple Google searches anybody can do, James, to prove to themselves that the federal government of the United States has been spending billions, if not trillions of dollars getting ready for this. Here's a couple of simple ones. The CIA and the word Denver. The CIA has been moving from Langley, Virginia to Denver now since about 2005. And you can find their press releases on Google if you choose to. NSA and the word Denver. NSA has actually been moving from the East Coast to not only Denver, but Utah, and other places to high ground for about the same period of time, about 2005. Plum Island is an island off the coast of New York, Connecticut, about 100 miles out. It's about a 300-acre island, where they, in the early 1950s, they set up a facility to study really fun stuff like anthrax and foot and mouth disease. They're moving it to Manhattan, Kansas. Not the island, of course, but the facility. And by the way, the island is for sale. But the publicly stated reason for moving the facility is, quote unquote, we've ran out of space on Plum Island. Well, you can do a Google image search, James, and you can see what looks like a 300-acre golf course with 5 buildings on it. It's not exactly run out of space.
Wow.
But it will be underwater.
Yeah, yeah.
Moving something as big and as expensive as the CIA or NSA or this Plum Island Animal Research Center is very expensive, very disruptive, and you would not do it unless you had no choice. But they have no choice.
Yeah,
that's why they're doing it.
You know, I've had a lot of people talk about conspiracies in the Ozarks, and I don't know if it was, perhaps it was Jesse Ventura with the conspiracy theory episodes. I think he covered the feature there.
He did.
Yeah. There's a lot of activity around there, and not just people retiring there. There's a lot of activity and surreptitious clandestine maneuverments.
Well, there is, James. The Arkansas, Missouri Ozarks is a vast area, tens of thousands of square miles, bigger than, well, one county in Missouri Ozarks, Texas County, is bigger than the state of Rhode Island, for example. So it's a vast area that comprises many tens of thousands of square miles, and there are a lot of things going on here that are what you might call sub rosa, covert. Yes.
Well, come back to the effects on the Earth at the moment. Let's focus on Nibiru, Planet X. People interchange that. We'll just call it whatever, either or. What do we know about this thing as it going to appear in the sky from historical accounts, I guess? What does it look like in the sky? How do we know it's coming? I'm not talking about astronomy today. I mean, there's a lot of different stuff, just disinformation out there, John. But from the historical accounts, what does it look like? When will it appear? Or how will it appear? How will it appear?
Okay. At the moment, It can only be seen from the extreme southern hemisphere. Antarctica is a good place to see it if you've got imaging devices that can see in the ultraviolet light spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
There's about 1 month a year where it can be seen in the visible light spectrum, which I believe is around June, but still it's only from the southern hemisphere. The 10th planet is 5 to 7 times the size of Earth, has a far larger iron-nickel core than Earth does, which gives it a lot more effect in terms of its gravitational effect. When it moves through our solar system, it disrupts and it interacts with all the planets and the sun. With our planet, there's a high likelihood that it will cause a pole shift where true north moves. For the time being, magnetic north has been moving towards Siberia for many centuries, and it appears to be speeding up. I think it's up to about 40 kilometers a year now, which is pretty fast, quite frankly, for something as big as planet Earth. And there's scientific evidence that this has happened, that magnetic north has been in many different places over many centuries. And this is how they can tell, James, when volcanic molten, when lava, I should say, is molten and flowing out the top of a volcano. While it's in that liquid state, all the magnetic particles in the molten lava line up with wherever magnetic north happens to be at that point in time. And when it cools off and turns solid, all those magnetic particles remain lined up with wherever true north happens to be at that moment in time. So they can go back to ancient volcanoes and they can determine where magnetic north was when that rock was molten, however many centuries it might have been ago. And it's been in a lot of different places, James.
Okay, this is the magnetic pole shift, and we know we have evidence of that because we can measure the resonance in the rocks. We have evidence of a physical pole shift too. I think the fresh buttercups and the little baby elephants in Siberia. Is that the only evidence we have of the physical?
Well, there's plenty of evidence, and I refer to it as magnetic north and true north. But here's what happens, James, and I'll go into the evidence in a moment. Magnetic north moves in a certain direction for centuries after century after century, and then in a period of about maybe 24 to 72 hours, true north catches up all at once. That's what we're concerned about, is when true north catches up with magnetic north in that 1 day or 2 or 3 day period of time. If you dig down through the permafrost in Alaska, you'll find tropical plants, which obviously could only have been there if that area had once previously been tropical. When the Tsar ordered the Trans-Siberian Railroad built beginning in it was either the 1880s or 1890s, they started going through that part of the world with construction crews and finding hundreds of flash-frozen mastodons, what you call little elephants. They're actually 3 to 4 times larger than an African elephant, these mastodons. Some of them were frozen in the standing position. They were flash-frozen so fast that after 3,600 years, the meat was still fresh enough to be thawed out and served as delicacies in Paris restaurants for human consumption.
Wow.
Now, you talk to anybody in the meat processing business where they take sides of beef and freeze them, what it would take to freeze a creature 3 times the size of an African elephant that fast. It's an incredible amount of cold, so fast that it's hard to imagine. These mastodons were eating semi-tropical plants when they were found flash frozen. The semi-tropical plants were still in their mouth being chewed on when they were flash frozen. They didn't even have time to fall over. They were flash frozen in a standing or sometimes kneeling position. That's how fast this happened.
Wow. Flash frozen, we're talking, okay, so pick a point and we get shoved into the North Pole or shoved into the South Pole, for example.
Well, that would be a 180-degree turn or 90-degree turn. 90 Typically, these pole shifts are 15 to 20, 25 degrees, which is still a lot.
A couple of thousand miles. That's a couple of thousand miles at least.
Exactly. And depending on where you are, it could be a really good thing or a really bad thing.
You're not going to walk out of there anyway, John. I know that much.
Now, where I am, my part of the world's going to end up a lot warmer because true north is moving towards Siberia, and that will make every place that in this part of the world, the equator is going to move north from where it is now. So I guess you could say that's a good thing. That's just a personal thing for me. I really don't like cold weather.
Sure.
But if you're on the other side of the planet, you're temperate climates north of the equator now are going to get a lot colder because the equator is going to be coming the other direction.
I had read Path of the Pole by Charles Hapgood, and Charles Hapgood, what an awesome researcher, prolific researcher. He even had Albert Einstein do a foreword for the book. Even Albert Einstein backed this idea of a pole shift.
Right. In fact, when Einstein died, one of Velikovsky's books was lying open on the desk of Albert Einstein.
Is that right?
Yeah, my friend Professor McCanney has become personal friends with Albert Einstein's secretary, and that's how he happens to know that information.
Oh, incredible! Wow, he was a prolific reader of Velikovsky. Then he must have had a really open mind, Einstein.
Well, they knew each other.
Yeah,
Velikovsky and Einstein knew each other.
Wow, very indicative of that. Wow. Velikovsky was from the same. Were they? They were both from Jewish faith, yes.
Well, apparently so. I'm not sure what role, if any, that plays in all of this, but
just in terms of Jewish history or the literature or the biblical sources, perhaps, I'm thinking.
Well, that brings up something else. I got a phone call, this is about 5 years ago, James, from a Messianic Jew. Now, these are Christians that keep the Jewish holidays, but many of them study the Torah with great diligence. So this Messianic rabbi called me, and he said, John, I was doing a presentation, and this woman walked up to me after I was done, and she said, did you get some of your information from John Moore? And he says, who's John Moore? So this woman gave him a copy of my DVD, and he watched it, and that's when he called me. And he told me, he says, John, I came to the same conclusions that you did through your interviewing Navy veterans by studying the Torah. So I found it fascinating, James, that this Messianic rabbi would come to the same conclusions that John Moore did by studying the Torah.
Incredible.
It's incredible. It's fascinating.
Well, it's also indicative of corroborative evidence or different lines of evidence running simultaneous.
Absolutely, it is, and that gives anything a lot more veracity, a lot more strength to it.
Let's come back to. I don't want to focus on the fear factor either, John, but it is a clear and present danger if we have Nibiru, something really, really big coming into our solar system, the disruption. Is there anything people can do today? What is people going to do? Are people just going to have to flock to high ground? Do we have a time frame on this? Is it wrong to think of it? Is it preparation time?
Well, everybody wants a time frame. That's a natural human quest. Yeah, I did the same thing. And in fact, I even scheduled time in a private astronomical observatory 15 years ago.
Really?
I was so naive. I didn't know you couldn't see it from the northern hemisphere at the time.
Yeah.
But I had to satisfy myself, and it was a fun evening, regardless. The Navy veterans were told during their lifetimes, James. Now, unless you've got the deep resources of the federal government to do what they've done, which is build an extensive network of steel reinforced underground concrete bunkers with everything you can imagine to live very comfortably. Unless absent those kinds of resources, which are very substantial, we encourage people to do what the Navy veterans have been doing now since 1979. Getting a hobby farm in a place with a good elevation, plenty of water, away from large metropolitan areas where you can be self-sufficient in terms of growing your own food, having all the water you need, and be safe. The Arkansas, Missouri Ozarks are known to be a safe haven for the following reasons. First of all, distance from major bodies of water. Second, altitude. Third, relatively short, relatively mild winters. Fourth, all the water that you could ever dream of. There's more bridges in the state of Missouri than any state of the 50 states, and the majority of those are south of the Missouri River, which is where the Ozarks are. A very homogeneous population, no large cities. The biggest city in the Arkansas, Missouri Ozarks is Springfield, Missouri, population 1/400,000. And of course, it's west of the Mississippi River, which means a much lower population density. The people who live here, I refer to them and myself as barefoot hillbillies or barefoot peasants. The major recreation for these men and women is hunting and fishing. In fact, when it's deer season, you may as well shut down your factory or your school, because no men are going to show up for work or school, either one. Which means almost every home in the Ozarks has several firearms. That's pretty much expected. And of course, the expertise to use rifles, shotguns, and pistols. Gardening is still a big pastime for many Ozark homes. Many people have chickens and goats and dairy cattle and horses. Missouri is a really big horse state, one of the biggest horse states in the Union, as a matter of fact. So the Arkansas, Missouri Ozarks has a lot going for it already in terms of people living self-sufficient lives. And getting back to more specifically to your question, it takes years to develop a hobby farm. I don't care how substantial your financial wherewithal is, James. It takes years. And I know people with limited financial resources. I know people with very substantial financial resources. And it takes both ends of the spectrum years to get a hobby farm to the point where it's actually growing enough food that you can live on it.
You know, John, I actually indulged in the whole process, and I can speak from experience. I was actually ashamed of myself because I'm such a learned guy in so many subjects, but I couldn't even tell you how a seed germinates and what happens when it goes into a plant. And for that reason, I tried a hobby farm, but it is a very, very difficult. You got to learn about the bug world. You got to learn about the plant dying. I mean, the survival rate and the warmth and the temperatures, and it's a science in itself.
It is, and my wife has a undergraduate degree in horticulture. Many of our neighbors are lifelong gardeners. Even if you've been gardening for 50 years, you're still learning. And it's pretty common for gardeners, when they get together in a social setting, to exchange little tidbits here and there about what works and what doesn't work in gardening. It's an ongoing learning process, whether you're doing it the first year or the 50th year. And there's no substitute for getting your hands in the dirt. You know, book learning is great, but the only way you're going to learn to garden is get on your knees, get your hands in the dirt, and see what works and what doesn't.
Exactly. And it's a practice thing, it's an experiential thing. You know, in the end, John, with the Irish lime, I ended up just growing fruits and berries that grow naturally, and it was like, you know, well, if this is the easy route, and, you know, I've took a little back seat from that. But, yeah, it's incredible stuff. John, are we going to, let's focus on the Valborg seed vault in Norway, this seed bank that they're building. Do you think this is a direct result of prior knowledge of this event coming too?
It's one of the more obvious.
It employs international knowledge of this, then, John.
No, there's actually dozens and dozens of seed vaults all over the world. Most nations of any consequence have their own seed vault, either run by the government or run by a university, or both. So the Svalbard one, which is right at the edge of the Arctic Circle, what an amazing piece of engineering, because they went to a place where no infrastructure at all, no roads, no electricity, no water system. In order to build this facility, they had to bring in everything, the housing for the workers, the electricity, all the equipment, everything had to be brought in by boat. I don't believe there's any roads connecting it with anywhere. I might be wrong, but I think everything had to be brought in by boat onto that site and start from scratch and build this facility. And they did it very quickly, by the way. You've got what they call summer up there is probably no more than 3 to 4 months. I think they built this place in about a year. So they were getting a construction crew that's qualified to handle heavy equipment and do that kind of work in Arctic conditions is no small thing. It's this is not your average construction. Commercial contractors can do that kind of work under those kinds of harsh conditions. It's basically the kind of thing that I would look at military type combat engineers to undertake.
Extreme engineering, yeah.
It's so harsh. It is so harsh to try to do anything in that part of the world.
I think the major point you pointed out there is the speed that this is happening at, John. You see that in the military complexes in America, these facilities?
Well, what takes place on these military bases is not open to public scrutiny. And so there's a lot of unknowns there, James. The Denver airport is one of the best examples of something that's kind of sort of in the public domain. They moved enough dirt there to build a new Panama Canal. Denver did not need a new airport, by the way. The airport they had previously was just fine and met all their needs. And there was no need, no aviation, no legitimate commercial aviation necessity to build a new airport in Denver, but they did. And
perfect cover story.
That will be the new headquarters for the United States government, as far as the main one and the one west of Mississippi. The one east of Mississippi, which would be a secondary capital, will be Atlanta, Georgia.
Yeah. In terms of rising sea levels, John, what's the maximum, what's the minimum expectations of a sea level rise?
The U.S. Navy says 400 feet. Now here's the question. It took me it took me about 3 years to figure this out. And as it turns out, James, what I'm about to tell you is common knowledge in every university that teaches oceanography.
Mm-hmm.
Sea level is measured at Cornwall, England.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've lived
and
there. Yeah.
It's been that way for probably between 200 and 300 years. Once you get to the equator, which is a long way from Cornwall, England,
Mm-hmm.
sea level is not quite 500 feet. It's about 490 feet above what we call sea level in Cornwall, England.
Yep.
That bulge of water spans the planet at the equator, north-south for hundreds of miles, north, hundreds of miles south. It's a bulge of water containing tens of thousands of cubic miles of water held in place by two things, rotation of the Earth and gravity.
Mm-hmm.
Anything that disrupts the rotation of the Earth is going to disrupt that bulge of water.
Mm.
That's where the flooding is going to come from, James.
I got you.
When the equator changes its place and that bulge of water is displaced, that's what's going to cause the worldwide flooding of all coastal areas.
Oh, wow. That makes so much sense, John. So that 10 feet extra of water at that bulge spread across the equatorial region.
I didn't say 10 feet. It's nearly 500 feet.
Sorry, 500 feet. Oh,
yeah,
wow.
it's about 490.
That's incredible.
Well, imagine a 50-story building. Each story of a commercial building is about 10 feet. That's how big that bulge of water is at the equator.
We're looking at cataclysms. No matter what way you look at it, this is cataclysmic, John.
A friend of mine, you've probably seen photographs of these massive flat rocks in the American Southwest called mesas.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
A friend of mine, very dear friend, another intelligence analyst, we served in Vietnam together. He was on vacation and he climbed to the top of one of those things. He says, John, there's seashells all over the top of this darn thing.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Wow.
Nobody brought them up there in a bag and scattered them. I'm here to tell you.
Sure.
The only way there could be seashells on top of mesas is if the mesa was under the ocean. There's no other way.
Do you think then the government accepts the clear and present danger of Nibiru coming and that they say to themselves, okay, we're not going to be able to save everybody if we could anyway. Even if we wanted to, we couldn't save everybody. Do you think they're just going to take an elite group of people or a special group of people or save the scientists, save the philosophers, or do you have any kind of opinion on that, John? Who's going to get saved?
There's been some motion Hollywood films and probably any number of novels where that scenario takes place, and they choose. First of all, what we're talking about here is continuity of government.
Mm-hmm.
So people who are already working for the federal government and their families would be part of the people that would be saved. U.S. military, not necessarily all the U.S. military, but select portions of the U.S. military. And then, of course, you would have them selecting people that would have the skills necessary to rebuild afterward. So you'd have from all the various areas of expertise, from practical skills such as mechanics, carpenters, plumbers, electricians, heating, air conditioning, cooling people, to artists, to scientists, to doctors, to dentists, and so forth, to make sure that they had very deep resources in all necessary skill sets when they come out from their underground havens.
Mm. Let's come back to the astronomy, John. Of course, there's a case of Robert Harrington. I don't know if you maybe focus on the conspiratorial end of that or the astronomical end of that, but I mean, we have like technical astronomical data saying that there's something in our solar system with I think it was an infrared.
Well, you touched on something very important, and I've got I'm reaching behind me here. Mm-hmm. Dr. Harrington, he was the supervising astronomer of the United States Naval Observatory.
Yeah.
And if you're going to draw a paycheck, James, for looking at stars, you're pretty much at the top of your chosen career path.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, where can you go for a better job looking at stars than being the supervising astronomer of the United States Naval Observatory? Well, he granted an interview with another person we haven't talked about yet, Mr. Zechariah Sitchin.
Oh, yeah.
And Zechariah Sitchin was a guy who could pick up Babylonian clay tablets and read them like they were the newspaper. Mm-hmm. But this video, I have it here in my hands. The title of it is, Are We Alone in the Universe? We've got Zechariah Sitchin in the office of Dr. Harrington at the U.S. Naval Observatory headquarters in Washington, D.C., interviewing Dr. Harrington. And in that interview, Dr. Harrington describes the size of the 10th planet, 5 to 7 times the size of Earth. He shows its orbit on a whiteboard, and the orbit that he shows from his astronomical knowledge is virtually identical to what Zechariah Sitchin found by studying the Babylonian clay tablets. He describes the 10th planet as having a far larger iron nickel core, and he even went so far to say that he thought it may be able to sustain life as we know it. I don't know how that would be possible, but that's what Dr. Harrington said. Now, not long after that interview, and that interview took place about 30 years ago, by the way, around 1985 or so, Dr. Harrington announced he was packing up equipment to go to the Antarctic and look for this thing himself, firsthand. And not long after that, when you see Harrington, he looks like he could be a linebacker for a professional football team, a really big, tough, healthy-looking guy. Not long after that, he allegedly died from a fast-acting form of cancer. From the time he found out he had it to the time he was dead was about 90 days.
90 days and he was gone.
Yep.
Wow.
That's where the conspiratorial stuff comes in, but I've seen no evidence, only speculation. We lost him, far too early. He was a very great resource to help give credibility to everything you and I are talking about.
Has anybody else in the astronomical field been able to take up Harrington's data and verify it? Or has there been a blockade?
Well, the only person I'm aware of that's publicly doing that is my friend Professor James McCanney. Professor McCanney is, in fact, a credentialed astrophysicist. He's taught astrophysics at the university level. He's taught mathematics at the university level.
Sure.
And he's the person with the highest legitimate astrophysical credentials I'm aware of is talking about this publicly. If there's anybody else, I'm not aware of that person. Now, there's people who have no scientific credentials whatsoever that claim to. I'm certainly not one of them. I claim to be a homicide detective because that's what I am. But when it comes to somebody with those kind of credentials, it would be Professor James McCanney.
I'm going to have to get Mr. Professor McCanney on the show for sure.
Absolutely.
Definitely a follow-up show.
I can't speak for him, but he just might do that.
Yeah. Because this is the stuff that I love, John. I mean, I love to do this from an astronomical sense, an archaeological sense, the biblical record. I mean, I'm like yourself, John. I look at any type of evidence and I want answers. And I do these shows to seek truth, John. And I just know that, there's a sanitized version of our history, or a sanitized version of archaeology, or a sanitized version of the press releases from astronomy being given to us. And when you look at it all together, it's like people have to be detectives themselves these days to get to the truth, John.
Dr. Velikowski mentioned what you're saying as a form of collective or cultural amnesia. And there's a whole area of study that's referred to kind of generically as forbidden archaeology, which gets into locating and analyzing man-made objects found inside lumps of coal, for example, or some of these megalithic sites around the planet that we're now finding out, for example, the Sphinx next to the Great Pyramid, maybe 12, 14, 15,000 years old, for example, that the erosion on it came from water. And there was no water around there the last 5,000 years. So we also we have found that nuclear devices were set off in Kashmir, India, about 12,000 years ago. A friend of mine was on vacation to Kashmir, and I asked him, I said, are you aware that there was nuclear devices set off in Kashmir about 12,000 years ago? He says, oh yeah, John, the local souvenir shops in Kashmir sell trinkets commemorating the nuclear devices set off here 12,000 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah.
Incredible.
In the Saudi Arabian Peninsula, there's an area of hundreds of acres of green glass where the sand was turned into glass because of something as hot as the sun. Now, before August 1945, we didn't know how you could get the heat of the sun at the surface of the planet. But in August of 1945, we found out twice, once in Hiroshima and once at Nagasaki. But this happened in the Saudi Arabian Peninsula about 12,000 years ago, where you've got hundreds of acres of the Saudi Arabian desert covered by green glass, where the sand got so hot from nuclear devices being set off that it turned the sand into glass.
When Oppenheimer, the father of the atomic bomb, he's been nicknamed, he cried and he talked about the Mahabharata and the ancient Indian epics as a throwback to what was going on in the 1940 tests of the atomic bomb. And it's like that the ancient Indian epics and this Indian philosophy has, there's no taboo there. There's no knowledge filtering. They seem to accept this knowledge and Fermanas and all sorts of ancient nuclear blasts. It's acceptable to these guys, whereas in the Western world, it's taboo.
Well, James, the Vedic writings are scattered throughout hundreds of Indian communities, villages. Only about 3 to 5% have been translated into English.
Mm-hmm.
Many of them appear to be little more than engineering manuals, quite frankly. Really? It's a fascinating area. I haven't looked into it as much as I would like to, mm-hmm. but it's an absolutely fascinating area. These transcripts, documents that are being found and recovered all over India that are many, many thousands of years old. Mm-hmm. Fascinating stuff.
And just to come back to earth changes, I know inside the Mahabharata they talk about the Sarasvati, I think it's Sarasvati River, that it's now only the remnant of it because of the earth changes on our planet has made this disappear, and as a result you can only see it by satellite now, but that kind of indicates how far back these ancient Indian epics go. And to come back to earth changes there, John, I mean, we're not just talking rising sea levels here, we're talking global earthquakes on a big scale.
Well, North America, of course, is where most of my focus has been because that's our home. Yeah. The U.S. Navy says that the weight of the water on the New Madrid seismic zone, which is about 100 miles from where I'm sitting, will trigger at least 3 9-point plus earthquakes.
That's massive.
They are massive. Now, in the winter of 1811, 1812, there were hundreds of earthquakes, 3 of them strong enough to ring church bells in Philadelphia on the East Coast, which is basically 900 to 1,000 miles away. So there is precedence for this New Madrid seismic zone being very violent. Now, in 1811, 1812, this part of the world had very, very few human beings living in it. The United States had just purchased, Louisiana purchased only, 8 years before, 7 or 8 years before 1804 from France. And it was relatively unoccupied, relatively uninhabited. A similar event today, however, earthquakes of that magnitude would result in hundreds of thousands of fatalities in St. Louis, Memphis, probably Indianapolis, probably Chicago. They keep finding various new parts of this New Madrid seismic zone, branches of it, going off north and south and east. Not so much west, but north, south, and east.
Wow. Wow. Come back to the astronomy, John. I know you've looked at the Vatican's research into astronomy, and again, I'm always trying to stay away from the conspiracy.
It's shocking.
I'm trying to stay away from the conspiratorial angle as much as I can. But
when you think of the Catholic Church, you think, well, most people think, well, charity hospitals and education and saving souls.
I know.
That's what most people think, and for a good reason. That's what they're known for. But to find out, as I found out, and I assume you have also, James, that the Vatican has spent the money, we're talking several millions of dollars, to build not 1, not 2, but 3 world-class astronomical observatories. Mm-hmm. Now, what's that got to do with charity hospitals, educating children, and saving souls? Nothing whatsoever.
World-class is the key word, John. I mean, these are world-class facilities, John.
But here's something that you probably don't know. There's a Catholic, my hometown, St. Louis, has enough square feet of Catholic-owned buildings to move the Vatican to if they need to. There's a lot. St. Louis has a lot of Catholic churches and schools and hospitals, all 3, and old folks' homes. There's a Catholic facility in St. Louis I'm personally aware of. A friend of mine was approached. He's a radio frequency engineer. He could build a brand new radio station and do the engineering. He was approached by the leaders of this old folks home, for want of a better term, extended care, to set up military-grade 2-way radio communications between this facility in St. Louis and the Vatican in Rome.
Wow.
Now, this would have been about 1998 or so.
Wow.
Now, there's no legitimate communications reasons to do that unless you had a fairly good idea that nothing we have now would be working. No telephones, no satellites, no fax machines, no internet, no nothing.
Wow.
That's why you'd spend the money to set up military quality, military grade 2-way radio communications between the Vatican and this facility in St. Louis, Missouri, which I'm sure is happening between the Vatican and Catholic facilities all over the planet. It would not just be St. Louis. I just happen to have that knowledge because my friend was approached to do the engineering for it.
I love your research, John, because you understand more than anybody, and I like to draw attention that motive and reason speaks volume, John. Motive and reason speaks volume. You can say whatever you want about the facts of the situation. You can put those facts in a different way, and everybody can say, well, that's not way to interpret the facts. But at the end of the day, there's a motive and reason for doing everything. And then when you just take the rest away and look at the motive and reason first, that makes you look at the evidence and the facts in a much more realistic way.
Yes, I was at a high school reunion a couple of years ago, and the wife of one of my classmates is in charge of security at a very high level. She's not the top person, but at a very high level of security for a government facility, and I won't mention which one. But she mentioned to her during our brief conversation that, have you noticed, John, how many Fortune 500 headquarters are moving to Denver? And I said, no, I haven't really thought about it. She says, well, you need to check it out. Wow. An inordinate number of Fortune 500 corporate headquarters are moving to Denver, also known as the Mile High City, because it's 5,000 feet above sea level.
Wowza. Incredible stuff, John, incredible. I want to draw attention to the Vatican again, and just to drill it home. It's one thing the military being aware of this, and I'm not want to bash the church, I really don't, but it's one thing for the military to be aware of this knowledge of Planet X, Nibiru, coming in, causing cataclysms, whatever you want to focus on, whatever damage is going to happen to this Earth, or whatever survival modes are going to have to fall into place. However, for the military to know this knowledge and have a response to it, whether that's secret or clandestine or whatever, that's understandable, because the military is going to be expected to do that. I mean, if it may not be a humane thing to do to let only a few people survive, or a small proportion. That's one thing. But for the Vatican to know this knowledge, John, and to sit on it, and to
they're doing it, and during
that's a different thing.
You can compliment the Vatican for preserving knowledge during the Dark Ages on one hand, but on the other, you can criticize them for keeping it to themselves. During all those centuries, which we look at as the Dark Ages, between the fall of the Roman Empire in the 400s and the Renaissance in the 1600s. We're looking at more than a millennium of Dark Ages. In the meantime, something happened regarding the Vatican a few years back. They closed the Vatican Library for, I think it was about a two-year block of time. The Vatican Library had been open every business day for centuries.
Wow.
There's a widely held belief, shared by myself, that the Vatican Library holds the remnants of the library from Alexandria, Egypt, the ancient library of Alexandria, Egypt, that were taken over by the Romans a couple of thousand years ago. No explanation was given other than they were doing remodeling. Well, that's not the way you remodel a library. You remodel a library incrementally so that people can still have access to the library. But it was, in fact, closed for 2 years. My belief, and what's widely held by a number of other researchers, is they moved many critical parts of the library, probably to safe havens in the Alps and in the Alpine Mountains, and either left behind copies or whatever they left behind to in the original library there in Rome, which is only the Vatican in Rome is only about 75, 80 feet above sea level, by the way.
Wow, incredible stuff. John, we're at the top of the hour. I just want to mention your website one more time, thelibertyman.com. You can read all about John Moore there. What a super interesting background you have just to talk to you today, John, and to get into this knowledge. And I commend you on your research. I really do, John. I guess tell us a little bit about what you're on now. What are you working on? I know you got the radio show. That's a
Monday through Friday, 2 hours a morning. All my shows are archived at my website, thelibertyman.com, on YouTube. We got 40 acres out here. We're trimming trees, moving rock and dirt, getting ready for summertime. That's pretty much it.
Wow. Well, listen, John, keep up the radio shows, keep up with the research, and incredible research you've done. It was great and enlightening talking to you today, and I feel I got a bit more closer to the truth, John. So I really thank you for your time.
Thank you, James. It's fun being with you. Don't be a stranger.
You too, brother. A little bit about John. We've got a very interesting bio today on this individual. We have a speaker and trainer since '86. He's a radio talk show host and private investigator, homicide detective since '73, homicide detective state of Missouri for 8 years. He's also a decorated Vietnam veteran. He's also flew 57 combat missions. He's been on bodyguard assignments for Ambassador Alan Keyes and Jane Fonda. He's the author of numerous articles on personal security, and he's the author of Feel Safe Anywhere, You Can Be Your Own Bodyguard. But today we are going to be talking about Planet X, and John has an unusual route into this because it's been a journey of discovery for John, and in a personal sense with contacts and actual physical events as well, and it's been an enlightening process for John. So without further ado, let's bring on today's super interesting guest. Hi John, very welcome to the show.
Thank you, James. Good to be here.
Wow, John, you have a decorated, colourful work history, John. Let's tell us a little bit about that. Tell us a bit about that part of your life, John. Is that something you enjoy doing? Is that something you?
Well, when I was, I guess it was I was 20 years old when I got to Vietnam. I was only been out of high school 15 months. I got there just 4 weeks after my 20th birthday. Very young man, to say the least. But at some point during that combat experience, I decided that I was going to do things in my life that were fun and interesting and were important, as opposed to just having a job. So my career has taken various twists and turns based on that foundational belief, and no regrets. It's been a good ride, and I'm still at it. Been a radio talk show host part-time beginning in 1994, and the last 3 years or so, more and more full-time. Not quite full-time, but close to it. I've
tuned into some of the shows, John. Great stuff that you're providing here. Of course, people can check you out on the background bio at thelibertyman.com. Of course, you've got your own YouTube channel there. You can listen to your shows as well. John, this is unusual for somebody with this prolific work ethic and work history to be in this field. Usually we have a lot of people researching Planet X from different aspects. I guess I just wanted to touch on the homicide detective part of your life. You must have seen some really unusual, interesting, bizarre scenarios during that work time as well.
Well, of course. I investigated my first murder when I was 25 years old. I still got one in my case inventory. I need to wrap up and do a final report for the local prosecuting attorney. But beginning as an intelligence analyst, and then later in my college degree as a paralegal, both my areas of formal education trained me to be a professional researcher as an intelligence analyst and paralegal. And it stood me in good stead all these years, James, because it trained my mind to work in a very focused and disciplined manner to do whatever I want to do. It was 15 years ago this spring that two friends of mine, independent researchers, presented to me the initial information that I heard about Planet X, and I thought it was pretty strange and pretty bizarre. But I took that information and went to a friend of mine who works for, as we politely say, the lettered agencies as an outside vendor. And he thought it was pretty wild also, but he knew me well enough, and we're now friends for 30 years. And at the time, we'd been friends for 15 years. And he went to some people that he thought might know about this, and it turned out they did. He got back with me about 3 or 4 weeks later. He says, John, this Planet X thing is exactly what you said it is. The government's known about it since 1979. They've been getting ready for it since 1979. Yes, it is real.
Wow, John, this is the thing I love about today's show is you're a no-nonsense guy, you're a very rational guy. That analytical skill set, like I worked as a systems analyst in the engineering industry, and I know what it's like to have an analytical skill set. It doesn't really matter what the problem is or what the research topic is. It's a set of skills that you can hone in on to get to truth answers, and it seems, John,
Precisely.
It seems, John, you seem to be doing that. I mean, there's so many things I could focus on today. I guess, tell me about the first line of evidence that you got presented to you, first of all, John.
Well, both these men, and one didn't know the other was approaching me, by the way, they both told me about the effects of the 10th planet when it comes to our solar system, which are the oceans coming out of the basins, 200-mile-an-hour winds for maybe a day or two, possibly a coronal mass ejection as part of it. That may or may not happen, what some people call a kill shot, and earthquakes, violent 8.5, 9-point earthquakes all over the planet. So, and of course volcanoes popping off. Pretty wild stuff, but there's evidence, James, that this has happened numerous times in the past. And before the evolutionary theory of Charles Darwin became so ingratiated in scientific theory in the beginning of the 1840s, most scientists believed in a catastrophic scenario of how this planet goes through very rapid, very violent changes. Because that's, quite frankly, that's where the evidence points to, not slow, gradual change, but rapid, violent change. And an author, a doctor named Emanuel Velikovsky. He wrote 3 or 4 books back in the 1950s and 60s.
Sure.
And he personally went to parts of the planet where you can still find the evidence of violent, rapid change in the form of bones of various animals all jumbled together in caves where they all met their death from being smashed there by water, and other sources of evidence. So that was my beginning point 15 years ago. Once I verified that it was real, I started my own research, and things were going along quite well, James, until the summer of, it would have been summer of 2005, I guess it was, when I was having lunch with a friend of mine I served with in the Army.
Mm-hmm.
He's a dual service veteran, U.S. Army Special Forces and U.S. Navy SEAL. And he told me about a classified briefing he'd been to in 1985.
Wow.
And at that classified briefing, they were all told, gentlemen, during your lifetimes, these oceans are going to come out of their basins, flooding all coastal areas worldwide, up to about 400 feet above what we now call sea level. And when it comes time to retire, gentlemen, you just might want to retire to the Arkansas, Missouri Ozarks as one of the known safe havens. Now, since that briefing, since I talked to my friend about that briefing, James, I also do something else you didn't mention in my bio. I teach concealed carry training, where men and women in Missouri can get their permit to carry pistols concealed.
Wow.
And in the process of that, I've met about 24 more of these Navy veterans, all of whom were at the same briefing, all of whom retired in the Arkansas, Missouri Ozarks because of the briefings that they received. And I've been able to backtrack the very first of those briefings back to 1979 also, when one of my listeners up in Montana helped set up the chairs, the tables, the light systems, the sound for a briefing of admirals on a Saturday morning down in New Orleans. So it's been quite a experience to locate these veterans who were at these briefings, to debrief them myself, and of course along the